All right, tonight we're focusing on gender-based violence, the tsunami of crimes against women that South Africa is battling. This week, Muzikayise Malephane has been sentenced to 20 years in prison for murdering 28-year-old Tshegofatso Pule in June last year. He entered into an agreement with the state after pleading guilty in the Johannesburg High Court yesterday. Malephane's lawyer has revealed that his client had been hired by Pule's boyfriend to kill her. Her body, you'll recall, was found in an open veld in Roodepoort, west of Johannesburg. To discuss, we're joined by Kayan Leung, who is the Policy Development Manager at Sonke Gender Justice. Ms. Leung, thank you for being with us. Do you welcome the sentence of the murderer of Tshegofatso Pule?
Good evening to your viewers. And Sonke Gender Justice, we firstly would like to commend the police and the National Prosecuting Authority in dealing with this matter quite swiftly in comparison to the other gender-based violence cases that we're currently facing in this country. In terms of the sentence, I've noted that the judge in this matter did acknowledge the prescribed minimum sentence in terms of Section 51 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act, and he did digress from the minimum sentence slightly in light of the extenuating circumstances with the accused.
Well, 20 years is lower, yes, than it would have been probably because he's revealed who he says paid him to kill her. Do you welcome that, getting to the truth of the matter? Of course, he has to go through the court system first, however, before we declare the boyfriend guilty.
Of course. I think in light of this, we do acknowledge that there was an agreement with Mr. Malephane, and I think it is crucial. We do welcome the sentence. I know that the public in general do feel that this is quite a insignificant and low sentence, but in regards to what our laws actually say, in terms of what the prescribed minimum sentence is, and in light of extenuating circumstances, as you've indicated, which is that he is now becoming a state witness for all intents and purposes, and given additional evidence to seek further justice for the family of Miss Pule. I think it is crucial, and we do welcome this.
Pule's boyfriend will appear in court on Monday. We can't name anybody yet, and apparently the claim is that it's because he had a wife. He didn't want her to find out that Tshegofatso Pule was pregnant. Those circumstances sound incredible, leading to the murder of a young woman, but it's not something that we don't know about here in South Africa.
Unfortunately, this is an extremely common and regrettable issue that is a driving factor in gender-based violence in our country and globally. That we have this gender power inequality deeply rooted in toxic patriarchy, and that we have this culture of violence where we have male superiority as the norm, and that men are entitled to ownership of women and strict reinforcement of these gender roles and hierarchy. And in this situation where two consenting adults entered into a relationship, and where the woman, Miss Pule, fell pregnant, it felt that there was a need to punish her for an agreement. And I think it really does speak to the fact that women in this country and globally are just seen as seen as to have lower social value and power, and it is this issue of controlling of a woman and the pervasiveness of entitlement.
And if you're inconvenient, you can be gotten rid of. You say you applaud the police in this case. Do you think this shows the commitment of the law enforcement officers who were on this case, and that commitment isn't always there, or were the circumstances easier here? I don't know how they tracked down first the murderer who's since basically pled guilty.
No, I think that's a really great question. I think there's a number of factors that have played into this. I mean, the one being it may have been the community at large that have brought forward information to the police that have made it easier to investigate the matter. But certainly, I think there is also a matter of resources within the state. But I think equally as important, and this is often raised by civil society in the gender-based violence sector, is that we often have police representatives or people within the justice system that are not adequately equipped in dealing with the sensitization around the complexity of gender-based violence, which leads to, the low reporting of crimes, the unwillingness or secondary victimization or trauma of survivors or victims, and them not actually recalling evidence, for example, or the fact that people just are so demotivated from actually engaging with the police themselves. So it is a number of factors, and I can't pinpoint exactly what happened in this case, only to say that we are pleased with the results.
All right, let's look at an entirely different case. This one that we're talking about was clear-cut. Somebody pleaded guilty. He's been found guilty of murder. But we know sometimes there are false accusations or there are unclear circumstances, and men say they are not guilty. DJ Fresh and Euphonic, the two DJs, this very high-profile case. And I'd just like to know your thoughts on it, because the case has been thrown out of court. But people are still very divided on social media. This is still something that's being talked about. What do you make of the fallout?
I think, in relation to issues of gender-based violence, it is not a clear-cut matter, and there are so many different contributing factors. And I think some of the stuff I've alluded to earlier on, there's this culture of violence that we have, this, gendered power inequality rooted in patriarchy society, and the social norms that we have, whether it be cultural, religious, low levels of women's empowerment, lack of social support, socioeconomic inequality, and substance abuse that all contribute to GBV. But in the case with DJ Fresh and Euphonic, it is always important to firstly acknowledge that in cases of GBV, it often happens, in private, in the dark, and it's not something that is, often open to public witnessing this. So that is the first and foremost complexity to acknowledge. Of course, in this case, a few days ago, the NPA made a decision to not prosecute because of insufficient evidence. And having said that, it doesn't always translate to that a person may not be guilty. And of course, I'm saying this cautiously because obviously we have to go, in order for somebody to be found guilty in terms of the criminal justice system, there has to be a burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt. But because of the nature of incidences of GBV, this often happens in cases where it's not in the light, and it's often already difficult to prove. Add to the fact of, as I've mentioned, people often are faced with sort of trauma, emotional trauma, psychological trauma, that they might not even recall certain evidence. So proving cases of GBV through the criminal justice system in itself is not always a straight arrow, and it is complex and very difficult to prove. And this is why, our parliament is, over the course of 2020 and currently still looking at revising laws that are related to gender-based violence, because they acknowledge that firstly, our current system is not victim-centric. It often, contributes to secondary traumatization and victimization of victims or survivors of gender-based violence. And secondly, the nature of our criminal justice system, and because of the heavy burden of proof, it is very difficult, sometimes to prove a case that has happened, 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that an incident may not have happened, but for the purposes of our criminal justice system and the laws that ensue, it does require that burden of proof to officially hold somebody accountable through the justice system.
All right, very quickly, how could the law change to become more victim-centric? And then, what do you do when you've got a he said, she said, nobody knows, because there are women who make false claims?
So, it is not a clear-cut solution to address this. I think some of the suggestions made to make the criminal justice system more victim-centric is, that we have professionals that are trained in dealing with these cases to actually understand the complexity. So when we have judges that are asking questions or handing down sentences, they understand the complexities that are attached to gender-based violence, the trauma that one goes through, the nature of how these the power dynamics of how these unfold. So I know we're talking about the example of DJ Fresh and Euphonic, but if you look throughout history and in South Africa and recently, there are so many cases that come out, and there's always a power dynamic involved, whether it be a man versus woman and their status in the community or society, or there's some sort of economic power imbalance, or even cases where people are, in political office. There is that power imbalance where that is exerted over as victim or survivor of gender-based violence. And one needs to understand this when you're dealing with cases and understand these complexities. It's not always black and white.
Finally, Ms. Leung, the incredibly rape cases went up in the last 3 months of the year. We got the crime stats this week. That's despite all the talk about commitment to gender-based violence. Does it seem to you like we are simply losing this battle?
I mean, I would flip the narrative and say we're certainly not winning it. I think we are taking positive steps towards trying to address it. There is so much work that needs to be done. As a starting point, we have the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, which is supposed to be a multi-sectoral plan engaging all stakeholders. I think what is crucial now is that we have a strong implementation and an accountability mechanism, and that this plan is fully funded so that all the stakeholders actually have the resources to carry out these areas of addressing the complexities of gender-based violence, whether it be services for victims, whether it be prevention mechanisms, whether it be, holding the different role players, the police, the prosecutor, Department of Social Development, all services accountable to ensure that people are actually getting adequate services and getting protection. And I think that is crucially important. And that's a start.
Yeah. All right, thank you for your time tonight. That was Kayan Leung, Policy Development Manager at Sonke Gender Justice. And of course, we'll be following the case very closely. Now a case against the boyfriend of Tshegofatso Pule.